As we continue to move across the viewport toolbar, the next thing I want to talk about are the 10 view modes that you have access to for each one of these viewports. Now, to give us a way to really see what these view modes are doing, we need to open up a level. So let's go to File, Open, and we'll choose VCTF Sandstorm, and click Open. Now, I'm just going to kind of start on the left-hand side and work my way to the right. If we mouse over each one of these objects, each one of these little buttons, you're going to see the name of the view mode. So there's Brush Wireframe, then Wireframe, Unlit, Lit, Lighting Only, Light Complexity, Texture Density, Shader Complexity, Light Map Density, and Lighting Only with Texel Density. So some of those sound a little bit complex. If you jump all the way back over to the viewport options, you can see each one of these here inside the menu, along with their corresponding hotkeys. So you can hit Alt 1 through 0, and you can select any one of these. Now, by default, here in the perspective view, we are in lit mode. This gives us lighting information as well as any material or texture information, allows us to really get an idea of what it is our level looks like. Now, the orthographic views, which surround our perspective view, by default, these are in brush wireframe mode. Now, if we take a look right next to brush wireframe, we have just regular wireframe. As we click between the two, you'll notice that the modes look very, very similar. And if you're completely new to UDK, it's very easy to get the two confused. Now, obviously, what these are going to do is just show you the wireframe of your level. So I'm going to go ahead and switch it on here inside perspective. And now we can see the polygon edges that are making up every single surface in our level, which is kind of nice. It allows us to really get an idea of our geometry. However, as I switch back and forth between wireframe and brush wireframe, the change that's going on is subtle, and I'd like to illustrate it by hiding a few objects. Let me take the perspective view, and I'm going to make it nice and big by clicking the Maximize Viewport button located at the far right-hand side of the viewport toolbar. Now, let's tap the W key, and what that's going to do is hide out any static meshes that we may have. I'm also going to tap the T key, and that's going to hide out any terrains that we might have. And if you have any volumes visible, you can hit the O key to make those disappear. So that's W, T, and O. Now, currently, I am in brush wireframe view, and you're going to see a lot of these shapes scattered across the level, like blue, interesting shapes. They're kind of like elongated boxes. These are BSP brushes. These are being used to define the shapes of various surfaces in our level. Now, I'm not going to go into any BSP creation techniques right now, but the more you start creating levels inside UDK, the more you're going to get used to how these brushes are created and their importance in a level. However, the engine itself during gameplay doesn't actually see these brushes. Each of these shapes, like if I select this BSP brush right here, which is now highlighted, this is an additive brush. All it's doing is defining an area of space with which mass will be added. Basically, it's going to create a polygon model in the shape of this volume. If we switch over to wireframe view, I'm just going to deselect our brush and switch over to regular wireframe, we can actually see the geometry that's being created as a result of that brush. Now, at this stage of the game, again, if you're completely new and you don't really understand the correlation between these two objects, it can be simplified a little bit. When you're in brush wireframe, you can select these brushes, and potentially, if you were so inclined, you could move them around. You could edit them, you could change their shape in geometry mode if you wanted to. However, inside of just regular wireframe mode, you can't select these brushes and you can't update them. So that's the real primary difference here. So let's go ahead and switch on to our next view, which is unlit. Now, unlit's going to look really sparse for a minute, so I need to bring back my static meshes. I'll do that by tapping the W key. I need to bring back my terrain, so I'll tap the T key, and I'll go ahead and leave the volumes out of the way, so I'm not going to worry about pressing the O key. Now, unlit is going to give us our texture, material information, but no lighting information whatsoever. It'll make the game look very flat, very much like games used to look several years ago. If we switch over to lit, the difference becomes obvious. So there's with our lighting information, and of course there's without. Now we can also take a look at lighting only. So we have unlit, then we have lit, we also have lighting only, which is kind of the opposite of unlit. This gives us our lighting information, but no texture or material information whatsoever. It's just the result of our lighting on kind of a neutral white surface. So if you want to see how our shadows are falling, you can get a really good idea of that sort of thing just by going to lighting only. Now, the next several view modes that we have access to here inside the viewport toolbar are kind of like diagnostic modes. They're ways that you can get an idea of certain performance issues in your map. The first of which is light complexity. And if you switch it on, in this particular case, nearly the entire level turns bright green, which is actually a good thing. What this mode allows you to do is visualize how many dynamic lights are affecting any given object. Green means they're only being affected by one light, which is what you want. As soon as any given object in your level is being affected by more than one dynamic light, you can start to run into performance issues. Now, that's not going to be something that'll be really important to you until you start playing a lot with lighting and creating dynamic lights. But for the time being, it's enough just to let you know what this does. If you see something like this where your whole level pretty much turns green, then essentially that's what you want, and unless there's a circumstance where you absolutely have to have multiple dynamic lights affecting an object, in which case that object will start to shift over to the warm spectrum, over through oranges and into red. Now, next to this, we have texture density, and this starts to look really cool. What this allows you to do is visualize how tightly packed the texture pixels of any given object are. So just as an example, let's pick on this stairway. So if we look at this in lit mode, you can see what it looks like, and let me go ahead and just kind of deselect it. So we got some stonework, it's got a nice normal map on it, which makes it look kind of chipped, really, really nice weathered look. Now if we switch back over to texture density, it's green, all right? And there are other things around here that are blue. This spectral shift is helping you to see how compressed any texture happens to be. As you shift over from blue to red, a texture is becoming much more tightly packed. If I rotate us around, we can take us to these ramps, and you'll see that these are starting to turn kind of orange. This means that the textures are much more packed here in these areas than they are over on any of the blue or green objects. As a matter of fact, if I select this object, and we start to scale it down, which I'm going to do by grabbing the draw scale fields at the bottom of your screen here in the console bar, I'm going to take that first number, and we're going to set that down to 0.5. And take a look at what happens. This object becomes a lot smaller, obviously, but it started to turn red. What that means is the same amount of texture is now covering a much smaller object.